Howdy, folks. Are you running a successful photography business and want to take it to the next level? Or are you just starting out and need to get your message out there? Or are you thinking of turning your hobby into some hard cash and don't know where to start? Well, in today's episode, I'm chatting with one of the leading lights in the world of influencer marketing to help you achieve just that. Right after this. Welcome to Camera Shake, where we bring you the insider scoop on all things photography and videography, giving you a unique opportunity to stay ahead of the curve. As always, I'm your host, Kirsten Nuts, and before we get into it, I've got one thing to ask of you. I've noticed that over 65% of our viewers on YouTube and listeners on audio are not actually subscribed to this channel. I mean, what the heck, guys? Come on. You could really help us out by hitting that subscribe button. It'll help us get even more amazing guests on the show. Again, I don't really know that that's really possible, but it's just one click. That's all it takes. Thank you so much. Now, without further ado, let's give it up for today's special guest, the marketing expert, author, podcaster, and lecturer in all things marketing. Give it up for Mr. Gordon Glenister. Gordon, good to have you on the show. How's things?
Yeah, very good, very good. I love the intro, very well polished. And as a seasoned podcaster myself, I always love listening and watching others and the way that they present their show. So, yeah, I'm fine.
Fantastic. Yes, I introduced you as a fellow podcaster. Of course, your podcast is a marketing podcast. Give us a helicopter overview over what you do and also what your podcast is about.
Okay, yeah. So I'm an influencer marketing expert and I help connect influencers with brands. I have my own one-to-one influencer program as well, where I help individuals become more influential. They don't necessarily always want to be called influencers, but I often talk about being a key person of influence. And my podcast show is called Influence the Global Podcast on Influencer Marketing. And I started that actually in 2019, and we're now up to about 130 episodes. It's very similar to this, very guest driven, and those individuals would come from the influencer marketing industry itself, or indeed influencers, just people that have got a great story to tell, fundamentally. I've loved doing it. I really have. It's changed a little bit over the time, but it's incredible actually to find that, you can be in the top 10% of all podcasts. And I thought, how is that possible? But actually, it's amazing how many podcasters just give up.
Yeah.
Isn't it? I'm still going strong.
Yeah, that's one of the things, it's one of the most important things is just to show up. You just have to show up every week or every fortnight, whatever your release schedule is.
Yeah.
That's the number one rule. If you don't show up,
Absolutely. Well, I think it's the same lesson in influencer marketing. It's about being consistent. And we publish on a Tuesday, which is today, every fortnight actually, and then it becomes a pleasure and not something that is all consuming. I know many people do it weekly, or I've even met some people that do a daily podcast show. But no, I'm sort of quite happy. I actually run two other podcasts, funnily enough. One is in the membership sector called Membership World. And another one which is growing your influence online, which I set up specifically for the Middle Eastern market. So I do that every occasional one, but the main one is the Global Influence podcast.
Now let's dive into influencer marketing specifically, because marketing is a thing that's so incredibly important for photographers, especially if you run your own business. I mean, it's important for anybody who runs their own business, but particularly for photographers. And, because we're working in a sort of, a visual medium, of course, social media platforms are always at the first port of call. But just to get everybody, on the same level, just sort of give us a brief explanation of what influencer marketing actually is.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's a new buzzword, but in a way, it's what I call emperor's new clothes, really. Word of mouth marketing has been around, for many, many years. We've trusted the opinions of others way longer than the last few years. But fundamentally, it's the mechanism of using individuals who have social influence to promote a product or service. And those individuals have often got trusted opinion. They're great content creators. or they just have a lot of knowledge. And that's what we're effectively buying into. So if you've got a new brand, you could say to yourself, trying to build an audience is going to take time. It's going to take money to invest online. And yet, actually, what you could do is collaborate with an influencer who's already got an engaged audience. And then what that enables you to do is to leapfrog and build your brand connection through the voices of others. And that social advocacy is even more powerful. You know, if you tell me that you're wonderful, I'll probably agree with you. But actually, I'd agree with you more if somebody else told me you were wonderful. Do you know what I mean? Because it's this third-party advocacy that's so important.
Of course, if we know this from like everyday life, it's you can watch, I don't know, let's take a random thing. Let's take a toothpaste commercial. We see toothpaste commercials on TV all the time. And they sort of, I don't know, like for me, I don't actually watch commercials, but, they sort of fly over my head. But the minute I sit down, let's say in a bar or something, and my best friend says to me, you really have to try out this Colgate Gold Plus Super Extra toothpaste. It's freaking amazing. My teeth are shiny white. I've only used it like a week and it's incredible. That is something that I would take a lot more serious. That kind of advocacy, is so much more powerful than any TV ad would ever be.
It really is. And do you know what I think is really amazing around some of these influencers is that they're telling the story of the brand in a very relatable, authentic manner, which means that we feel connected to that individual, depending on the niche, of course, which is also a very strong proposition for brands in being able to tap into these very individual niche voices and communities. Just as I was saying a few minutes ago about, building an audience. But you shouldn't also think about influencers as though, yeah, great, this is the holy grail. I'm going to spend some money and everything's going to, I'm going to get more business than I can imagine. Because actually your brand is still new to that influencer's audience. So they need to build up some trust. But in a way, the good thing is that they trust the influencer. So you almost get that sort of trust by association, if you will, because if they're promoting, it's important to find the right one, of course. What you don't want is somebody that's effectively just promoting products every 5 minutes. You want to know that they've got a good engagement rate, their follower base is increasing, and they've got a significant number of views versus the number of followers that they've got. What I find really fascinating as well is the data behind these influencers, which is why you have influencer platforms and influencer agencies like my own that can really dive into the metrics behind these individuals. Because you can look at somebody's Instagram and think, wow, they've got a great aesthetic, wonderful pictures. They've got 30,000 followers. Fair amount of comments on the face of it. It looks good, but you've no idea where those followers are based. They could be based in South America or in America, which is fine, but not if you're wanting to promote a product or service that is very UK driven. You might have a product or service that was slightly more female orientated. Well, therefore you don't just want a female influencer. What you want is an influencer that has a high percentage of female followers. And then, of course, you want a higher engagement rate. And that largely is about the types of comments, shares, saves, views, because all of those things are signals that the product is good or that the audience is liking what they're seeing.
So for any photographer, let's say starting out in business, maybe somebody set up their own business or they're thinking about getting into business, or anybody who maybe hasn't really dabbled in marketing per se, other than putting the occasional Facebook post or Instagram post out there, where would you start?
Yeah, so I would start, we're talking about photographers, so I would be thinking about TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram primarily. Well, first of all, the most important thing to do is, before you even decide your channel, is what is your message? What's your audience? Are you a wedding photographer, or are you a lifestyle portrait photographer, or what is your particular niche? Because that's really, really important. Is what we're trying to do is to find that audience and where they're most likely to be. There are, if you wanted to, for example, be somebody that was going to be in the exhibition market and do lots of photos at industry awards, then I might even suggest LinkedIn, because the people that are going to be booking you are event organizers, and they're most likely to be residing on LinkedIn than they will on some of the others. So it's understanding that. The other thing I would do is do your research and spend way more time than you expect on this. So if you want to be the best wedding photographer, then the first thing you need to do is look who else is big online. Look at the type of content that those big wedding photographer influencers are doing. Is it short form video content? Is it to camera? Is it just showing their work? Are they doing stats? Are they what are the types? So one of my little tips is what I call 10 by 10. So go and find 10 what you believe are significant, influential photographers in your niche, and then look at the last 10 posts. Yeah, and then so put this onto an Excel spreadsheet, and then look at what type of comment that they're getting and receiving. And that will give you 100 pieces of insight. And from that, you'll be able to use 20% of that in such a way, right, okay, so it's clear that after having looked at all of these 10 people, that this type of content is landing better. So what you're then doing is you're then putting that into a metaphorical washing machine to allow your ideal content plan to come out. The next thing to do is to make sure that you are consistent with posting, ideally 3 times a week, and ideally on a set time that you know that the biggest percentage of your available audience will be online. And by the way, Rome wasn't built in a day, so it's not, just you need to feel that it's going to take a little bit of time. You might like to engage with a few friends that are photographers that want to support you. And in the early days, it's just getting them to comment and like on some of your stuff as well, just to allow the ball to keep rolling. And then I would suggest putting some paid media boost behind it. And what that's doing is but I'd only suggest you do that on what you believe is the types of posts that are really working well. In other words, this is a good post. It's just not being shown to enough people. And so therefore, by putting a little bit of money, it could be £100. It doesn't have to be a lot. And then that, before time, you'll start to see things grow consistently.
I think this is probably the single most common point of failure, is the fact that, when you engage in any form of marketing for your whatever business, in this case, photography, it does really require a lot of planning, a lot of consistency, and really, some hardcore execution over quite a long period of time.
It really is. Yeah.
The vast majority of people sort of think of it as like, I take a behind the scenes snap and I put it on Instagram or something, randomly whenever, and then maybe then nothing happens for a couple of weeks and then there's another post. And, I myself am guilty of that, just like most people.
We all are, yeah.
But in terms of marketing effectively, it really is. It's all about discipline and consistency, really.
It is. And I would just add to that, test and measure. And the reason I suggested that you have a look at some of your competitors is because other people are being successful, but, why? They often say 50% of marketing works and the other 50% of it doesn't. The question for most people is understanding which, what it is. That's the sort of holy grail. But you can really make it by just spending a little bit more time on analyzing what type of stuff is going to work. That's not to say that you don't want to just necessarily copy somebody else's, because I do believe in the premise of creating uniqueness. I mean, I'm doing a webinar later today, which is from an English cream tea expert. Now, she's really labelled herself. That's what her e-commerce business is. But what I like about what she is, she's been really niched down on exactly what she says. So rather than just say her name, she's known as the English cream tea expert. And therefore, in the same way that you have Supercar Blondie, you have the yacht guy. Do you know what I mean? So creating an identity that people can remember you by is also quite a significant part of this process.
Hey, let me just jump in real quick to tell you about the amazing sponsor of this episode, Platypod. Platypod offers innovative camera support systems designed to unleash your creativity. With their stable, versatile, and portable solutions, you can capture stunning shots like never before. And I'm not just saying that. As the host of the Camera Shake podcast, I can personally vouch for Platypod's incredible products. They've become an integral part of the show. In fact, I'm surrounded by various Platypod products holding up lights, cameras, microphones, and so on. It's really helped to transform the way I make the show and the way I shoot at home, in the studio, and on location. But don't just take my word for it. Explore Platypod's website at www.platypod.com to discover their range of products, including the Platypod Extreme, Platypod tripod heads, and the brand new handle, of course. Make sure to follow Platypod on Instagram and Facebook at Platypod Tripods for exclusive updates, tips, and giveaways. By choosing Platypod, you're not only investing in your photography, but you're also supporting the Camera Shake Photography Podcast. Thanks again to Platypod, our amazing sponsor. Platypod, where innovation never sleeps. And finding your platforms, that's another really super important part, because, you know, it feels like there's a new social media platform popping up every 3 seconds, you know, and then so, you know, it's difficult because you can spend really a lot of time just engaging with every single social media platform there is, you know, and some of them pop up, they're the next big thing, and then they sort of fade away, you know, in the sunset.
Well, all I would do is, and as creative people, we're often guilty of following shiny new toy syndrome, aren't we? If we see something exciting and new, we want to try and follow it. But what I would do is remember Instagram still hangs true as one of the biggest influencer platforms. It's, you know, it was there at the beginning. So I wouldn't, I would be thinking about, you know, if you're really, really busy, just focus on one and do it well. If you want to, rather than trying to spread yourself too thin. So, for example, when I create video content, I actually create it on the TikTok app, and then I effectively reshare it on my own Instagram, and I'm building up more of my YouTube as well. But, you know, I'm really, really busy. I've got lots going on, and, you know, you could literally be consuming content all of the time. Same as my podcast. You know, the reason I only go 2 weeks is because I don't want it to be all consuming. You know, it's better to be consistent and fairly regular rather than think, right. Because I know sometimes people have started out on podcasts, doing a weekly one and then given up after about 15 episodes because they realize it's just taken over their lives, you know. So I think everything in moderation. That's what I would say, Kirsten.
That's it. I mean, I think the average life expectancy of a podcast is about 7 or 8 episodes or something like that. So it's
right. Surprise me.
Yeah, it's not, isn't it? I mean, it's like, you know, we've talked about this on this podcast many times, but it really is a thing. You know, you start, you think it's a really great idea, you start, and then, you know, then it turns out to be hard work. In actual fact, you know, for those of you listening and watching, if you do want to have a real insight into what it's like to, you know, to create and to run a photography podcast, then make sure you check out last week's episode where I sat down with Steve Brazel from Behind the Shot and Dave from He Shoots, He Draws, Dave Clayton, and we went into the weeds and we discussed, you know, and compared our experiences about what it's like, you know, to do this week on week on week on week. And again, some people release fortnightly, like Behind the Shot. I love the weekly format. It really works for me. I love the engagement. I love having these conversations. I always learn a ton. And so, so for me, it works. But I can clearly see how that's difficult a lot of the time. But as long as you have a schedule and you're consistent, it's absolutely fine.
That's exactly what I was saying. Absolutely. Whatever works for you. And even if it's monthly, whatever works for you. That's the most important thing is, and that's the same when building your social influence and building your personal brand, which is something I spend quite a lot of time on. There's hundreds of thousands of photographers out there. How do they all stand out? And it's being memorable for something. It's the same as I was running a talk about this the other day. If you look at dear old Bruce Forsyth, I don't know if any of you remember him, but he was famous for his catchphrase. It's nice to see you nice. And his little walk when he came onto the show. People don't forget that. Why does Jack Grealish, for example, that plays for England now? I mean, he's a great footballer, but there's plenty of other great footballers. But the amount of publicity he got from his hairband was incredible. So he sparked a trend. So, what is it that you can do that is going to create somebody to say, wow, that's really cool, you've got to push the boundaries sometimes.
Yeah, it's really, I think it's also important to put some of your own personality into something, whenever you're projecting yourself on social media and you're engaging, an audience. I think it's really important to bring some personality into it. Otherwise, it just very quickly becomes very bland. And it also reminds me of the gray man. I see that on TikTok a lot, where you see a number of different accounts and they all seem to be the same. Although that being said, for some reason, I keep seeing dog accounts. What's up with that?
Oh, yeah. Well, actually, dog influencers are huge, and they make lots of money through brand campaigns, not just, by the way, from dog food, but from other types of brands wanting to connect with those types of audiences. If you did a TikTok video and suddenly a cat or a dog came into that video, I'll guarantee you your number of views would rise significantly.
That's definitely something to try. But that's an interesting thing about this. Because clearly the algorithm, the way the algorithm works, basically, the algorithm, like the robot overlords. The way that works is that basically, it basically measures where your interests lie, or sort of, it analyzes your behavior on that platform. It then figures out, okay, well, Kirsten likes dogs, so now we're going to serve him up loads of dog videos, because the likelihood that he's going to watch those is higher than if we served him up cat videos, because he doesn't like it. I do like cats. I think for all of you listeners, I do like cats. But that's really something, if you think about that, I mean, when you're creating content, if you can really hit that niche of your target audience, then actually the algorithm isn't your enemy. It's actually your best friend, because it'll take your content and it'll then serve that content specifically to the audience that you're intending to hit. So it's really all about getting that right.
Absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, everything to do with the tags, the hashtags, you want to be owning the space. If I'm going to look at using a photography influencer, I basically want to see lots of, and we've been looking for some photography influencers recently. But what I want to see there on their Instagram is not only great shots, but I want to see the behind the scenes type of shot. How did they get those shots? What was it that, and I've now started to follow those individuals just by personal interest. And I am absolutely fascinated by, this, they almost start with the finished product. And a bit like, what do you call the program that David Attenborough does, where he does sort of 50 minutes of amazing filming, and then the last 10, 15 minutes are how they got that. And I think there's as much interest in that part of it. How did they get, 25,000 flamingos to all move at the same time or be at that location and get that one shot? And it really does sort of fascinate me, the story behind how they did it, rather than, it's like, don't keep serving up features, provide benefits to your audience.
That's really interesting. There's a book I remember, which I found super interesting, called Primal Branding. It's all about the story behind something, like the story behind your business, behind your venture, whatever it may be. And I think it's absolutely true. There's sort of a primal curiosity, I think, when, in people just naturally to want to know what goes on behind the scenes. And I remember you mentioned David Attenborough. Do you remember The Blue Planet? Do you remember that series?
Yeah.
And I remember there was either was an extra bonus episode, or maybe it was the last episode in the series, where they really it literally was just all behind the scenes, and they basically went into like how they made the show. And I mean, it was just mind-blowing. The show was phenomenal, but once you really knew how much work and effort went into it, and that's, of course, it's the it's a social behavior bias. Once we know, it's of the, I can't remember what it's called exactly, but it's just as soon as we know how much effort goes into something, we value that thing even more for sure. And when you think about it, like looking at lovely little penguins and coming together, and you think, oh, isn't that lovely, isn't that amazing? They may have had to stay out there for weeks or months and months and months, and in some cases years, to get those perfect shots. And that, of course, is a huge amount of cost and time, and you get the pain and the suffering sometimes on these photographers, but they know that when they do get those moments, all of that sort of pain erodes, so that people really see it. But you're absolutely right. I mean, when I saw that, I thought, wow, these guys, I knew it was good, but hats off to these photographer and camera crew. Yeah, because it was incredible. I think it took them 10 years to make the first show. It was 10 years in planning and shooting and like trying to, because a lot of the shots you could only get once a year, for example.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
It was absolutely incredible. But of course, that's a really good idea for just about anybody. If you're thinking about getting into social media, don't just show the finished product. Show the behind the scenes and how you got there. Now, here's the thing. I'd like to ask you, because sometimes I hear conflicting arguments. Let's put it this way. Sometimes I hear people say, like, "Oh, you could post all the stuff across all the platforms," and then sometimes I hear people saying, like, "Well, you got to split up the type of content across different platforms, because why would somebody follow you on one platform if they already get that same content on another platform?" So, for example, you can say, like, "Well, I post my finished images on one platform, but then the behind the scenes stuff on another platform." Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. I mean, obviously the audiences are split. You are going to get some crossover audiences that follow you on both platforms. I would say both, but multiple platforms. But and I'm thinking probably more TikTok and in Instagram, which are somewhat suited. So yes, but at the end of the day, the way the algorithm works, it's only going to serve up your content to a very small percentage of that audience. You've got 3 seconds on TikTok really to capture them through a really, really entertaining or inspirational, educational hook. And my view is always, you have to think about multiple ways of which you can reach out to those audiences. Yeah, your audience may primarily be on Instagram, but the people that you want to connect with, for one reason or another, may not be on it on that particular day. So you've got another hit on TikTok. When you're talking about brand awareness and engagement, for me, it's about making sure that you show up in multiple places, so that in the same way that a big brand, new advertising campaign isn't just going to go on one TV station. The chances are it'll be part of a multimedia exposure. It might be on bus shelters. It might be on, underground posters and stuff like that. So it's the same scenario as what you're doing here online. It's just, there's no such thing as negative publicity, just no publicity.
Yeah.
So you can be a bit controversial with what you do as well. I do think look at Piers Morgan, for example. Love him or loathe him, he's got a huge follower base because what he does do is he engages in the conversation, and people want to feel like they're adding their point of view. He revels in the negative comment, actually. But, there are risks, of course, by being too controversial, particularly when that's your primary business. But sometimes, you have to put a hand in front of the face. You have to try and keep during the pandemic, we had more influencers start up than any other time before, because obviously a lot more people are online. And what you've had now is accidental influencers, people that just want to make prank or funny videos, and with no intention of being influencers, but just actually because they want to do it for fun. And then suddenly they've found themselves with 500,000 followers and an engaged community, which then becomes very attractive to brands. So, but the story there is that's because they've followed their passion. I think people that steadily think out and say, right, I want to be an influencer, I want to attract all these brand deals, and they almost forget about the importance and value of creating an audience with a unique perspective.
I think that's very true. It's, it always surprises me. Well, maybe it doesn't actually surprise me, but it just, it amuses me, actually, I should say. Is that when, you go to primary schools and you ask kids, what their, favorite future jobs would be, what they want to do in the future. You used to have, I want to be, a famous actor or a famous musician. Now it's YouTubers. And they kind of go, oh, right, well, that's a lot more work than you think it is.
Yeah, but I think it's because, what it is that they see the excitement. I mean, when you say YouTubers, also influencers, I think 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 kids want to become influencers because and that just shows you what an impact these individuals are creating on these younger people. They can be closest to their somebody that they aspire to, that wears really cool clothes, really, has got a great singing voice or other, just entertains them. It creates a community. And again, I was speaking to my friend who's the cream tea expert, and she was saying to me that she's become or found herself becoming much, much more than just somebody that sells and promotes cream teas. She's actually found that people, particularly in America, have reached out to her and love her content, almost feel like she's become an auntie or a grandma to them. Do you know what I mean? It's quite fascinating to see that this desire for human connection online has never been more apparent than it is now. And maybe because we're having a difficult time in our lives and lots of bad things going around, and people are struggling with cost of living, and there is a desire for people to connect with somebody that they can relate to.
Yeah, and it's never been easier to connect with people either. Even 10 years ago, I remember, when Facebook first came out. I actually remember when Facebook first came out. And I remember just the idea that you can connect with people online that that you lost contact with decades ago, was just an amazing sensation. I live in the UK. This is not, I wasn't born here, and being able to very easily communicate with people across the pond, and over in Europe was just, it was amazing. It was just, it just really, it really made a difference. And so, I always thought that the term social media was actually a perfect terminology for that, because of course we're talking about a particular medium, but it is so much more social, and in a sense also so much more democratized to a degree. In particular, I always feel like, podcasting is a great medium because it's such a, it's the ultimate democratization of broadcasting, where anybody can set up a podcast. It's relatively easy to do. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It doesn't necessarily require a lot of skill. This podcast being the best example for that. but it's such a democratic way of doing it. And then really just, I think the filter is really just how much people stick with it, and how, I guess, I don't know, how hungry somebody is to actually make it a success. How How do you measure that, by the way? I mean, this is a thing when it comes to social media engagement. Is like, you might be, let's say you've set up some social media accounts, you're promoting your new photography business out there. How do you measure a response? Because I know that it can be quite disheartening, especially in the beginning when, with this podcast, you look at the actual figures, the numbers, and you go like, oh, okay, well, that's like, all right, today we had 2 people listening. Phenomenal.
Well,
and
it's a really important point, actually, because even I have found myself getting disillusioned at times. We all go through that cycle of, and that's why it's important to engage with others. I mean, I happen to be part of the MPN, which is the Marketing Podcast Network, and there are 60 podcasters. What I found really interesting is that we can learn off of each other. But we can also share our challenges, like you've just said, when you've put together what you believe is a really good podcast, and then you get, like hardly anybody listen to it, and you think, well, or not enough people have reviewed it. And that's because we're just looking at it from our periscope, if you will. We're not necessarily thinking about the fact that you send an email out to mega thousands of people and 1% of people will look at it. So we're not necessarily taking that context into consideration. But measurement is a very important part. And the reason why I say it's that is that you should be optimizing your content and looking to improve it all of the time. So that's why I go back to the importance of researching your competitors. What are they doing? What can you learn from people? You want to be looking at all the signals, which are likes, subscribe, comment. I mean, as somebody that's a creator, it's important for you to be asking questions. You could be doing polls. You could be doing contests and competitions to create a reaction. You could, as I say, ultimately we all want sales in some shape or form, don't we? We want revenue. But that's the same as any sort of marketing funnel. You have to build up awareness and consideration before you're in a position to drive people to want to know more about you. But unless you tell people what you do and how people can work with you and the value you bring on a fairly consistent and regular basis, how do they know? They may be just thinking, you're just a regular podcast guy that entertains me. The fact that people could work with you or me afterwards can be sometimes lost in translation because we're so driven by thinking, I must keep promoting the show. Lots of successful podcasters will promote their education program, will promote other things that they do. Look, we're all guilty as charged of that, by the way. I think as well, we shouldn't underestimate content burnout and content overload, where you feel like you're on this hamster wheel. And I get a lot of content creators and influencers talk to me about this, is that because they've grown such a substantial audience and they get lots of comments, they feel like they literally are in a hamster wheel where they have to keep going and keep producing all of the time. So when Christmas comes, I love it when I see somebody say, guys, I'm taking 2 weeks off now, so there'll be no content for 2 weeks. Or they try and produce the content for a whole month, and they do it over 2 or 3 days, and then they just literally schedule it out to go out at the required time.
That's exactly what I do. I mean, that's how I create, spare time for myself. Is I basically work ahead of time, ahead of schedule. So I cram a lot of interviews in, and then I sort of release them over time. That basically then gives me some time to maybe take a week off, or just actually not do anything for a week. And it's it's one of the main things that we discussed actually in last week's podcast as well, was that sort of feeling of burnout, and the fact that as you get more successful, not only in podcasting, but let's say you start promoting your business on social media. Let's say you actually then gain some work on some potential clients from that, you then have to actually go out and do the work, which then leaves you less time to promote your business, or to promote your photography, which then gets you even more into this hamster wheel. And of course, there's a point where the revenue just isn't there that you could just outsource things. So I'm a big believer in outsourcing stuff that I don't want to do. But of course, you have to actually create the revenue first before you start outsourcing things, because these things usually cost money.
On my podcast, I've been fortunate to have some sponsors at various times. And what that enables us to do is to make sure that all the editing is done by a third party, and the promotion and everything else. So that whilst I don't necessarily earn too much myself, it isn't draining my time or resources. So I absolutely subscribe to having, do what you love. Do what you love. I mean, editing doesn't float my boat at all. It doesn't. So, and therefore, what I want to do is what I'm good at. I want to run influencer campaigns. I want to educate people about how they can be more influential. And because the more time I spend with that, the better value I can give to my clients. Whereas if I'm stuck in an administration and, constantly trying to sell stuff all the time, in a way, it devalues what I'm trying to do.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of other stuff that goes around that too. Because, just setting up, let's say a YouTube channel to promote your business or an Instagram account, that's only part of the picture. Because there also have other marketing activities you have to undertake to really put your business on the map. Like networking is a big one, for example. What would your advice be for somebody who's just starting out? Maybe they've just decided on a number of social media platforms that they're going to create some content. What's the next step on top of that?
So networking, very easy to do. Well, I say that. It depends on, some people, of course, have social anxiety, so it may not be so easy to do. But really think about not going everywhere and being out all of the time. Do it that you're going to enjoy. I used to be involved in BNI, actually, Business Network International, many, many years ago. And I had the pleasure of interviewing the founder of BNI, Ivan Meisner, on my show, who was just an amazing guest to have. But I would find that the networks that are most likely to be where your perfect ideal customer profile is going to be. So, for example, if you really wanted to focus on wedding photography, then I would definitely be going to the wedding shows, to the where are brides going to be, or anything where that audience is likely to be. That's where I would want to be focusing my attention on. I'm an ambassador to a private members club, actually, in London. I find that to be really helpful and useful, where I can dip into very many, and that's the benefit of influencer marketing, of course. It's not one industry specific. I could be talking cybersecurity one day, food and drink the next, investment the next. So it can be, so if there's an event going on that I think is going to be where there potentially could be some good clients, then I could go to that. And therefore I stand out because most of the people there are going to be related to investment. And if I say, look, I'm an influencer marketer, it genuinely gets people interested. Oh, really? Whereas if I was to go entirely to an influencer marketing show, yes, then you could say there's going to be lots of people interested in influencer marketing, but then so are all of our competitors as well. So finding that blue ocean opportunity is a good one. Also aligning yourself with the host, and in some shape or form. And if that's going to be online groups, is doing something that you can help them with. Do you want to be a fellow moderator for the Facebook group? Do you, can I help you with anything? Because that type of service makes you much more indispensable, but it also gets you on the inner sanctum of the opportunities that you might want to work on. You're
absolutely right. And I always think that, with when it comes to like in-person networking events, that, my own personal history with networking is basically I got into networking really, again, at the beginning of the pandemic when everything else stopped, and I sort of realized that I didn't have any local knowledge. Like I live in this place outside of London, but previously my clients were international corporates, so really it didn't really matter where I lived. But when the pandemic hit, I had to refocus my photography business and look at more localized, smaller businesses. And so I figured that networking groups would be a good way to get to know some of the local sort of business landscape in my area. West London, Hertfordshire, that sort of area. For all of you Brits listening, you probably know what that is. But what I found, and it was a steep learning curve, and there's like a gazillion different different networking groups. Some of them are online, some of them are in person, and some of them are sort of a bit of both. But the one thing I always thought, like as a photographer, it's so easy, especially with in-person events. Just take your camera, snap some pictures, and then send them, to the organizers so they can use them on LinkedIn. I mean, why wouldn't you do that? It makes perfect sense.
Absolutely. Or if you want to take a picture of some of the people that were there, would you like a portrait picture that I can send you? Tell me, I'll send it to you now. What's your WhatsApp? So you can almost do something that instant. Or have you ever thought about when was the last time you had some headshots done for your social media? Happy to have a chat with you about that. There's a great website called Photo Feeler, I think it's called, where you get a number of random individuals that can rate your online photo in a business, a social, or a dating scene or something like that. And they can rate you according to likability, to influence and everything else. And I must admit, I did this for a bit of fun. And I remember looking at two pictures I had, and one was a lot more smiley and engaging, and I had high likability for that. And yet I had another one that had me with a microphone that looked much more authoritative and influential, but it dropped slightly on the likability. So it was quite interesting to see how people react to your online photos and videos.
Yeah, and this is why I always say it's really important, for any business owner. It really, is to have professional headshots. I mean, it's so important because you actually, you're working with a professional who knows exactly how to bring, whatever it is you need to or want to communicate. A professional will know how to bring that across visually. And that's so important.
Particularly now, as people are talking a lot about personal brand, and I don't mean just literally people that are authors, speakers, and consultants and coaches. I'm also talking about people that are in executive roles. We now know that we are more likely to follow individuals than they are corporates. So, even if you work for a big company like IBM, they realize the value of social and employee advocacy hugely. I don't know if they've gone down the route of taking pictures of all their people, but they did create a community called the IBMers. And the IBMers are effectively, internal influencers. And they've been sharing content online about stuff that's happening in this sort of IT world using IBM's content, but actually sharing it in a very authentic, genuine way, so that what you've got here is, Bill Jones, who happens to be a senior tech guy at IBM, really talking about how to solve some really interesting issues and problems. And if you're in his wheelhouse, then this guy comes over as a really strong expert opinion. So I'm going to follow him. Oh, and this guy works for IBM. Wow, I better find out more about IBM. So in other words, people are discovering the brand through that person rather than the corporate noise that you sometimes get.
And ultimately, it boils down to people by people. Ultimately, and this is why it's so important to really, bring yourself across in the best possible light, in in your online marketing.
Yeah, for sure.
Talking about that, are there any trends that you see happening now, or where do you think this is going over the next few years?
Well, particularly influencer marketing, I think we're going to see way more live stream selling. So people are effectively, we're already seeing it through TikTok Shop, and we're seeing more and more people going online and selling products and services. So it's like, guys, I'm going to be live every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 7:00. Don't forget to tune in. It's almost like it's a radio show. And then they're saying, look, you know, these are the new products that I've been looking at, I've been reviewing. I've got my top 10 to bring to you. And that has been hugely, I mean, certainly hugely successful in Asia. I mean, you've got some Asian TikTokers and live streamers that are making millions. That's why 2 or 3 years ago, Alibaba and Amazon were recruiting 100,000 influencers because they realized that they were going to be able to be selling products through their affiliate network more than ever before, which was then going to drive more people to Amazon and Alibaba accordingly. So I think we're going to see more of that. We're going to see more B2B influencer marketing, so that, you know, these may well be experts in their field in fintech or cyber, in AI, but they may not necessarily be called influencers, but they have the ability to influence, and that, of course, is something that brands want to tap into. And obviously, AI generally is going to play a big part in not only the photography industry, but in the whole creative industry when it comes to processing, ideation, and indeed, you know, using individuals for education to share your tone of voice. It's incredible what you can do with some of these tools now. Somebody told me the other day that we're going to be 200 AI tools are coming on the market every single week. So I think, and I was at a conference about this only a week ago, and it was talking about, will AI replace my job? And this leading expert was saying, no, somebody with AI trained skills will replace your job. So I think that's sort of some of the things that are going to shape our next 2 years.
And that's certainly there's a pressure on, you know, anybody who works or deals with the social media sphere, you know, whether it's as a content creator, whether it's, you know, whether you're creating content to promote yourself or your own business, or whether you run something like a podcast like this. There's always pressure to just, you know, to feed the beast, you know, to feed the monster and just, you know, create content.
Yeah.
But AI tools can really help you create a lot more content a lot more efficiently than you could ever do before. And of course, you know, right now, if you utilize those tools, you may still have the edge. But in my view, you know, a few years down the line, that's just going to be the norm. Like, everybody's going to be using those tools, and then you're going to have to really, you know, come up with something new to actually give you another edge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And if you don't, then you might be sort of left behind.
Well, that's a fact. That's absolutely a fact, you know. And in many ways, you know, if you think about younger people, they're digitally native. You know, we've got a lot of people in my age group that are just getting the grips to being online. You know, I mean, that's not to say that there isn't adoption, but if you look at men over 55, for example, the level of social media engagement is still relatively low. And here's the irony, is that we're probably in the biggest income stream left. You know, we've paid off our mortgage, kids have, you know, left home. If you've had school fees, that's all finished. And yet, you know, so for brands, we're an ideal target market that's very much underdeveloped, in my opinion. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting few years, but influencer marketing is not going anywhere. I mean, it is literally, when you consider 2016, it was $1.6 billion worldwide, we believed. It's now heading for $23 billion in a relatively short period of time. So I would certainly see this moving towards $100 billion in a few years' time.
There you have it, folks. The importance of influencer marketing, absolutely clear as anything. In fact, if you want to learn more about influencer marketing, you have a book out called Influencer Marketing Strategy. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, well, the first one was launched in 2021, but I have a new one that an updated edition, which is going to be released very, very soon. But it's also won the Business Book of the Year Awards final in 2022. So it's a real compendium of knowledge, and I interviewed about 40 people. So there's loads and loads of top tips and advice about how you can execute and run an influencer marketing program.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I know you have to run. So again, thank you so much.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Lovely to have me on the show.
Okay, folks, that's it for today. It was fantastic having Gordon on the show. And as always, before we go, let me just recommend another episode that I think you'll love. Check out episode 198 with Scott Kelby. I'm sure you'll absolutely dig it. If you enjoy our content, consider supporting us on buymeacoffee.com/camerashake to help us continue creating and bringing you more exciting episodes. It really does mean the world to us. And for those of you who are listening to the audio version of this podcast, did you know that there's a fully fledged video version over on YouTube with plenty of examples of our guest photography in full Technicolor? Well, you should, because I mention it all the time. There you have it. All you have to do is go over to YouTube, search for Camera Shake Podcast, and you'll be able to watch all past episodes on there. And if you're already on YouTube, then, well, drop us a comment, hit the like button, ring that bell, and share with your friends. Your engagement helps us reach a wider audience all over the world. So, thank you for listening and watching. And remember, new episode drops every Thursday, so make sure you mark that in your calendars. Until next time, keep shaking things up in the world of photography. See you next Thursday.